Welcome everybody to Sports Tonight. I'm your host, Jake Geigle, and this is episode 26, the Adrian Peterson episode. And this might be a little bit of a shorter episode, but I wanted to get something out. So to discuss a few things didn't get to in the previous episode. If you haven't taken a listen to that, go ahead and check it out down below. Posted on Wednesday. First off, happy late 4th of July to everybody listening. Hope everybody had a splendid day. And there was some pretty huge news on the college football recruiting trail. All prospects are ranked by ESPN in their ESPN 300. Make of that what you will. However, they seem, for the general most part, to be fairly accurate at times, more so than others. However, yesterday evening, around 7:30 in or 9:50 Eastern Time, Decorian Moore, the number one ranked wide receiver in that ESPN 300, the number three overall recruit, ver- verbally committed to the University of Oregon. And Oregon, in doing so, beat out a few teams such as Texas, Ohio State, and LSU, who he was formerly committed to, however, then decommitted to LSU and has since committed to Oregon. Now, this is huge, in my opinion, huge news for a few reasons. Number one, it goes to show what the current staff at that university has been able to accomplish over the past few years. They've had two really great back-to-back recruiting classes under Dan Lanning and everybody else that's involved, have had their highest ever finish on the recruiting trail in terms of ranking ever in all of that program's history. And another thing, the location. Historically, if we go back to the Chip Kelly era, for example, they didn't, they more so appeared to go after three stars, people that fit how they wanted to play, and they're like, maybe we can turn them into something extraordinary. Like, for example, Anthony Thomas, who was obviously at Oregon in the year leading up to 2014 was when he was drafted. Anthony Thomas was a bit of a outlier, if you will. He was one of the fewer players at Oregon that committed to Oregon who was like a 4 or 5 star. One huge example is Kenyon Barner, who played for the University of Oregon from 2009 to 2012. And at the time, Rivals.com, who was another company that ranked high school players in college football and basketball, ranked him as the 38th best running back in the country. And he was a 3 star. Yes. So he was a 3 star recruit. And with Oregon, he had a very successful college career. Ultimately, eventually ended up playing for a few NFL teams. Started with Carolina, then moved to Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, and a few others, and eventually, and hasn't played since 2022. But like this is different from what is happening now, where the recruiting staff and the staff at Oregon, Dan Lanning included, are traveling to places like Texas. Victoria Moore is from Texas, so you beat out a school in Texas as big as Texas, says something. Obviously, you beat out LSU, and the SEC has had some success with producing great wide receivers that have eventually gone into the NFL. Some most more notable ones include, in recent memory, Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and of course, Ohio State, who could be by some considered receiver university in ways such as having Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr., and plenty of other great wide receivers that have gone on to the NFL. And so what their staff at Oregon is doing is now saying, no, we're going to go after the best players in the country, even if that means we have to travel, pack a lot of PJs, plan a lot of trips, be away from home for many months of the year. We're going to put in that effort to make sure we get these guys, to be in the running to get them to come play for us. And now, one second thought on top of that is if this continues for Oregon and Dan Lanning continues to be able to do this, which so far he's proved that he has and that it won't change. They could very well end up one time or another having a number one ranked class as well as a very good shot of winning a national championship within the next 5 years. I believe that. And just think in terms of the Big Ten. Again, historically, Oregon's been to the Pac 12, the Pac 10, whatever have you. So the big knock on them and other teams like USC, for example, were, oh, but you're playing in the Pac 12. Are you sure that's the level of competition you want to be playing for or playing against? However, now with Oregon transitioning to the Big Ten, w- one of the two biggest conferences in college football, what happens if they beat Ohio State, beat Michigan? Not that any of this will happen, but just think on terms of the possibility. What if they win the Big Ten in their first year? I think it could be a real mental situation for Oregon and Oregon recruiting if they beat some of these historically big brand teams like the Ohio State and Michigan that have been good for so very long. And in terms of other previous commits on both sides of the ball, starting on offense, Oregon has Dallas Wilson, the number 6 wide receiver in the country. Number 9 pocket passing quarterback, Achilles Smith Jr. Hope I pronounced that right. Jordan Davison, Jordan Davison, the number 5th running back, and many and a few others. On the defensive side of the ball, you have Dorian Brew, the number 5 rated athlete, Brandon Finney, the number 7 rated athlete in the country, and another top 15 recruit. Nasir Wyatt, the number 11th rated outside linebacker. And so I think if they, as I said, if they can continue to build on this and continue to accomplish some of these things consistently, they could they could have something going for them within the next 5 years or so, even maybe even longer. Who knows? I th- I think it's a definite possibility, though. Now, moving on, going to take a quick break, but when we return, I am going to discuss which teams I will be starting or am considering starting a dynasty with in the new EA Sports College Football 25 league. Alrighty. So, moving on to the new EA Sports College Football game. I think, in terms of talking, when we talked about Dynasty, for me, the easiest way, or the first thing to get out of the gate, if you will, is to talk about which teams I won't be starting with right out of the gate. And those are any of the Blue Bloods. Nothing against them, because we love the Alabamas, the Ohio States, Michigan, Texas, Georgia, all of them as college football fans. However, what does it say about you if you start one of those dynasties with a team that is already has high 80, 90 overall to start? Now, this is no judge zone. However, this is something that might be slightly judgmental. Perhaps. Maybe. We shall see about that. Now, moving on to, and this is in an order of teams that I will look to start a dynasty with. Now, whether that ends up being online or solo, I'm sure about that at any given moment. But starting off at number one, I would want to start with Eastern Michigan EMU. And there are two larger reasons for that. In terms of this aspect of the game and this game mode and college football in general, there's things that are always going to change or change every couple of years. Some of those being things such as roster, head coaches, maybe coordinators. But and in terms of this game specifically, the things that won't change are they got some pretty nice looking jerseys. Got to give them credit where credit is due. And on top of that, you have the gray field to play on. So, in my opinion, those couple of things matter more than perhaps your starting roster. Because your roster will change on a year to year basis, especially with all the new additions regarding the transfer portal and things as such. So, moving on, number two, if you're doing an online dynasty and somebody took Eastern Michigan or whoever else you're thinking about, my number two group of teams. Now, this is a group of you'll understand why in a moment. Any of the academies. So that being Army, Navy, Air Force. And I don't. Regardless, how cool would it be to take the representation of the military in some facet in regards of college football and take them to the top of the mountaintop again, especially for one of the three teams that used to run college football back in the day. And you gotta go back a ways. But given the era of college football and how it's structured now, you don't see that as often or really ever. So how cool would it be, number one, to be able to do that? And number two, with to be able to do it primarily with the triple option. How fun would it be to be able to run up on your opponent using the triple option and you're running for 400, 500 yards on 50 plus carries combined between your quarterback, your fullback, and one of those wing backs? That, in my opinion, would be pretty cool. I'd enjoy that. That's I'll say it. I would enjoy that. Now, moving on to number three on the list. This is more of a nostalgia reason for me, and I will explain. But my number three on the list is the Georgia State Panthers. And some of you may be looking like, I didn't even know that team existed. And I wouldn't be surprised, unless you're a diehard college football fan, as I am. They are in the Sun Belt Conference, so definitely a group of five. However, the last time we had this game, NCAA 14 on the PS3 and Xbox 360, this was one of the final dynasties I did, was with Georgia State. And I think, given that it's been 11 years, a decade, it would be fitting to kind of end one generation with Georgia State and start a new generation a decade later with Georgia State and kind of have it be that bridge the gap kind of feel. So that's personally. And these other two, the Kennesaw State Owls, because just how unusual or how unknown that team is. For example, if you look on ESPN and go to things that is like stats, ESPN doesn't have any stats for passing yards, rushing yards, or receiving yards in 2023, but only 2023, which is interesting. One, every other year I mean, up to a certain point, of course, up to a certain point, in 2022 they have it. And for team stats, 2023 don't show anything passing, rushing, or anything like that, or offense, nothing. Only defensive stats, kicking, and what have you. So I think that would be a fun team to do it with. Another fun, exciting team to kind of below the radar, if you will. And the last couple of teams I have here, at number five, I have App State. App State has been known to shock the college football world before. They've gone into the Big House and beat Michigan, along with a few other teams where they, on paper, had no chance of winning. So I think, but even then, we've never been a team to compete for a national championship. So I think taking a team such as App State, who's had the history of knocking off some of those teams like Michigan, it would be cool and a fun experience to get them to that highest level into the national championship game, which we love, but also hate at the same time because it's on a Monday. But we love the stage of it. Just how cool would it be to go into that game with App State or any of these teams taking on a Georgia, a Texas, an Alabama, an Ohio State, an Oregon, LSU, an Ole Miss. One of those higher level teams that are projected to do well, especially this year, and shock the world on the biggest stage of that sport. I think that would be really exciting. And number six, I have a historical aspect comes into play with this team. Boise State. And again, like as I said earlier with Eastern Michigan, there are things that are going to change in this game. Roster, coordinators, what conference you might play in, who you play against. But there are things that won't change. The blue field and the blue jerseys at home. And a few other and exciting jerseys to play in. But Boise State in the past had been really solid. And I think it would be super exciting to hate that team, knowing everything that we know about them in the past. The Boise State Broncos have a few super exciting games in their past. They played in the 1980 National Championship game, played against Georgia, beat Georgia in 2011 at, in the Georgia Dome, played in the 2010 Fiesta Bowl against TCU, won that game, and won the 1958 National Championship game. However, most notably, the most well known of those games, or their biggest games, is Fiesta Bowl win over Oklahoma 43-42 in overtime. It wasn't supposed to be close. It, in terms of football, was a true David and Goliath story. Boise State came into the game as underdogs, and they were, in the media's eyes, just lucky to be there on that stage playing against a team like Oklahoma. And so you have to think, can they replicate that? And maybe they can, maybe they can't in this new college football system with the 12-team playoff and the automatic bid for the four conference champs being SEC, ACC, Big Ten, and Big 12. And you have the group of five bid. And so I think it'd be fun to go through that and take them, try and get them back to that mountaintop and even higher than they have really accomplished in the last 20 years. That I think would be exciting and well worth the battle. And last but not least, I think another team that I would consider doing a dynasty with right out the gates is whoever is the worst team in the game. In 2014, it was Old Dominion, and I don't think they'll be the worst team in this game. But if you're able to start with the worst team in the game, the worst roster, probably the worst in terms of coaches, head coaches, coordinators, or what have you, probably the worst, some of the worst facilities, worst prestige, and you're able to climb that mountain all the way to the top and hoist the trophy, what can anybody say against you now? They can be like, oh, but you had this player, you had this other player who was like made it so much easier for you, or what have you. You had this amazing quarterback that won the Heisman, best running back in the country, great defense, great offensive line that helped you run for 600 yards a game. And all you have to say is, brother, I had the worst roster of the game to start. What are you on? And that's all. That's all that needs to be said. And so, with that, we are just few days from that release. It officially releases on the 19th. Pre-order is the 16th, about there at least. And so, with that, I want to thank you all for listening. It's a bit of a shorter episode than those in the past. However, it's always a joy to talk sports. Thank you all for listening, and see you all next time.